Hey guys, this is John, and this is a climbing the rating ladder video. Let's open with D4. I'm playing an 1887 rated player, and let's play my main repertoire. We'll go D4, C4, Knight C3, and now we decide if Black wants to play King's Indian or Grunfeld. We get to see if they want to go with one of those, and they go with King's Indian. Okay, I'll play E4. Yeah, and now on castles, E5 isn't the greatest decision by white because although it attacks the knight, after knight e8, those pawns are prone to being a bit overextended. So I can play some of the standard moves that I often play here. Knight f3, f3 is a line that I like to play sometimes. I'm thinking about playing something a little bit different though. So let's maybe play bishop e2. I'll be flexible here. Play bishop e2. And I've seen some ideas where in delaying the development of this kingside knight, white can think about getting an attack on the kingside with g4, h4. So, okay, d6 is normal. And then rook e8, preparing e5. The thing is, though, if Black were to play e5 or wants to play e5, they could have done that on the previous move. So this looks a little slow to me. When Black plays e5, I'm probably going to close the center anyways. So I'm thinking about going ahead with this plan that I mentioned, guys, g4, and meeting e5 with d5. I'm going to do it. I could start with h4, but I like ruling out the reply of h5. This move makes it harder for Black to achieve h5 in response if they want to try to slow down my kingside attack. Hope everyone's been doing well. I'm going to ramp up my YouTube recording in the near future. I've been working on a couple long-term projects that are close to coming to fruition. So I know if you're a viewer of my channel, it probably feels that way or has felt that way for a while. But yeah, I'm excited because not only am I going to have a little more time now, but you'll see me more often on YouTube specifically. So b6, looking to fianchetto. Yeah, Black's mixing a number of ideas here. Like the whole d6 thing is standard for the King's Indian, but then playing rook e8 and b6 just doesn't, in my opinion, gel very well. So if the intent is to get some pressure on the long diagonal, I'm not really seeing how that's going to work out because I can play this g5 move at any moment. And I think I'm going to do that. Let's kick the knight. And I expect knight fd7. And I might just go ahead and play h4. And look to make contact with Black's structure. I mean, we're still a long ways off from any sort of decisive attack. The bishop on g7 represents a pretty good defender. But if I'm Black here, I think I'm starting to get a little nervous about my king's safety because there's not that many defenders of that king other than this bishop. And it's not like Black has achieved much else. Looks to me. So, okay, c5. Let's go ahead and play d5. I wonder if Black's going to try to stab with e6 just to get some counterplay going. I think you almost have to here. Okay, knight e5. But that too goads me forward. And I can play f4, and that knight has to go right back to d7. So that looks pretty nice. f4, knight d7, h5. Also thinking, is it worth delaying f4? Probably not. I'm going to go for it. It does make any sort of action with my dark square bishop on the c1, h6 diagonal more difficult to achieve. But I think the sheer momentum that I have here is well worth this for me. So we're going to continue h5. I feel like Stockfish or something. I'm playing very aggressively with my flank pawns in this game. It's an engine-approved strategy in general. Okay, knight f8. So Black's tucking in here. So if I were to capture on h5, how do I think Black's going to take back? I would guess with the f-pawn. I think any other capture, just on the face of it, looks rather poor. So, okay, I mean, bishop g4, looking for a bishop trade. Maybe just develop knight f3. h6 is some cramping strategy I could think about, but I'm not keen to completely shut things down. I'm looking to attack if I can. So leaning towards the capture on g6. Leaning towards that. And maybe then bishop g4. Again, could play bishop g4 right away. Could play queen d2 and try to castle long. Lots of options. I'd say these are my two main candidate moves, bishop g4 and h takes g6. I'm going to go with h takes g6. And again, I'm expecting f takes. I would really doubt black takes with the h pawn and leaves that h file completely open. Likewise, if they take with the knight, that seems to invite f5. So yeah, black does play f takes g6. And let's play bishop g4. Looking to get rid of their light square bishop. Offer a trade for that piece. Because eventually, I do have my sights set on h7 and possibly f5. Okay, e6, so counterattacking in the center. Yeah, this crossed my mind. I was kind of wondering if something with queen d5 at the end may be worthwhile for me. But I also don't have to react to this move. I could simply develop, let's say, with knight f3. Because if black were to capture on d5, I can take with the queen. So I'm leaning towards doing that. I think I'm going to play that. Just bring the knight out. Because now there's no attack on my bishop on g4. So let's go ahead and play this. Now I have a lot of space. There's no doubt. I mean, just visually in the position, white has more space than black. But as I like to say on my channel, with great space comes great responsibility. So I have to maintain that space. And black takes, but that seems to just blunder queen takes d5 check. I'm going after that rook in the corner. And I don't know that black has too many ways they can confuse the issue here. That looks pretty decisive. But we'll see. Sometimes there's little surprises, but no, they resign. Okay, short game, only 13 moves. I'm always hesitant whether I should post these, and you guys seem to like it when I post them. So we'll do a quick little autopsy on this game. Yeah, so this is a way black can play the King's Indian, just move order-wise. A lot of King's Indian players start with d6. But like I said, when black castles, e5 knight e8 is known not to be all that great for white. So what black did is fine. Yeah, bishop e2, d6. And I think if you play the King's Indian defense, you have to be pretty adept with the move orders. This is not an opening, just given how much space you're giving up with the black pieces. This is not an opening where you want to kind of be wishy-washy about the move orders that you choose. And I got that sense with black. Like rook e8, that kind of tipped me off that they might not completely understand what's going on here. Because again, if they want to play e5, you can just play it right away, especially when I have no knight on f3. So there's no worries about white taking and trading queens and then trying to win this pawn on e5, which is a consideration, by the way, if the knight is already on f3. And sometimes if white's playing knight takes e5 here, black has to rely on knight takes e4, common counterattack. So rook e8 kind of tipped me off that black might not be so familiar with the move orders. And then I'd say especially b6. I have seen this with King's Indian players before, but I really think this is too slow. Looking for the queenside fianchetto. There is one line, now that I'm saying this, where b6 is played, but it's a very specific line in the classical variation, which is again with knight f3. So I play g5 and then h4. I think black's getting into somewhat desperate territory here. Now c5 makes sense, but knight e5 inviting f4, whereupon the only safe move for the knight is to go back to d7. They've just given up so much space now. Even still, after all this happened, knight f3, let's try to come up with a decent way of playing here for black. Like let's say knight a6, maybe trying to maneuver to c7. This is still a game. This is very much still a game. Black just shouldn't initiate the capture on d5 when I can take with check and fork the king and the rook. Right? Although maybe, let's just say I play queen d2, maybe they could take on d5 next and then play bishop e6, and the queen defends the rook at this point. I guess there's still some question about f5. Yeah, this is... Well, they even have knight c7 here to ward off my queen, which is trying to pin their knight. So they jumped the gun with e takes d5 in a already somewhat tricky position. I think knight a6, though, would have been okay, at least to my human eyes. Maybe the engine will find some concrete way to play this for white. Maybe it's taking, and then after knight takes, then playing f5. But there, now I could get into the overextension type thing I'm talking about, like this, where suddenly the attack on the undefended bishop on e3 rears its head. So let's click into the game review real quick. And as I like to remind you all, oh, my opponent just sent me a friend request.
Grow your lead into a win.
As I like to remind people, it's so important to just draw your own conclusions, even if it's just for a couple minutes, like I just did, before you look at the game review, before you look at any engine input. It's absolutely crucial. So, all right, I can tell by the graph, it does largely approve of what I did. There's this little dip here.
Develop a knight off its starting square.
So it doesn't like g4, interestingly, in response to rook e8.
Bishop e3 develops the bishop.
All right, I got to mute this thing because this thing annoys me. Let's go to the manual review. I like my tools that I can be in charge of. Yeah, so bishop e2. So there is some value, I think, to delaying the development of this knight. They're even playing h3 sometimes, pretty early on, hinting at g4 and just waiting to see how black sets up. Controlling the g4 square is useful in general as well. But yeah, bishop e2, d6, bishop e3. Could play g4 early here, but bishop e3 is another move that just fits with a lot of the setups that white likes to play here. And I'm kind of curious. Let's just throw on the Explorer here. So there have been... I'm going to shrink my camera for a moment. There have been 3 master games from this position where white did play g4 on 2 occasions. So, maybe it's not fair to call rook e8 like an amateur mistake. It has been played a couple times by this player who I think is this is probably an online rating. So rook e4, rook e8, even though that didn't pass the sniff test to me, maybe it's not that bad. So g4, and what does the engine think black should do here? Thinks black should play c5 in reply immediately. Okay. Yeah, and one thing about c5, this wasn't so relevant in the game, but if I take and try to win a pawn, not only could black maybe get some compensation after this by developing and trying to demonstrate that there's a bunch of holes in white's position, having thrown a bunch of pawns up the board, but they also might not even take back on c5. They might play this move queen a5 that the engine is suggesting, because that prepares d takes c5 with the queen's help, but importantly, it threatens knight takes e4. Uses the pin here. So that's the tactical justification for c5 at this point. And then what happens if I close this? e6. Okay, this looks kind of similar to the game, but I guess in a accelerated form for black. They're trading like e6 for b6, which I think should be to black's benefit, the difference between those two moves. Yeah, because like I said, b6, trying to put the bishop on b7, it doesn't have a lot of future there, but you do want to try to open the center in some way if white is signaling they're going to attack on the flank. So it calls g4 a mistake. I kind of see that. I mean, wants me to play some more pedestrian move here, I suppose. But I think it does require for black to act pretty vigorously in the center. So b6. Yeah, g5, knight fd7. I saw no reason not to play h4. Okay, this is interesting. So it's saying d5 is maybe not the absolute best move here. Okay. Yeah, again, kind of for a specific reason, black can play b5 in the style of a Benko gambit. I gotta say, I wasn't even thinking about this move at this point. Psychologically, it's hard to envision black playing b5 after they've just played b6 a moment ago, but I see the point. So if knight takes, you can take on b2, and if pawn takes, you can play a6. And this is very much like the Benko gambit, where black can try to open up lines on the queen side and maybe get some compensation. The general goal of tilting the battle away from where I'm hoping to play on the king side. And long term, if we look at my king, it's not so clear where my king's going to hang out safely when I've committed to playing the g pawn all the way up the board to g5 and then h4 with the intention of h5. So, yeah, given the lack of space that black has here, I think the big thing is if you're playing black in this position, let's just flip it around for a second. I mean, you got to have a bit of a sense of urgency. You don't want to go crazy, but you're cramped. You have to have a pretty specific game plan about how you're going to break out of this. Okay, so keep that in mind when the trend starts to go against you. Like, don't panic. Don't do something rash, but you got to double down in terms of your thought process about how you're going to work yourself out of that. Okay, and it could be a calculated risk at some point, but when the vice starts to close like this, yeah, you got to have something in mind to counteract that, because black's really lacking space here. So my opponent played knight e5, and again, this invited f4. I think this move makes sense. Yeah, h5. Other moves here too. Queen d2, I think I mentioned. Maybe looking to castle long. King f2, the engine even says. Probably just a general coordinating move. Yeah, I think, imagine the game goes like this. Maybe slowly I start preparing h5, possibly some doubling on the h file. Maybe it's as simple as queen d2, rook h2, rook h1. Many ways I could play this. Like h5 itself is not the only way to handle this, but a pretty obvious one. I could just sit on the space advantage, maybe wait for black to break out somewhere, be it in the center or on the queen side. That's a perfectly good way to play it too. Yeah, and so what I did next, I actually had a feeling maybe the engine wouldn't like this. Taking, but it seemed pretty natural to me, capturing and getting this half open H file. I really doubted black would play H takes G6, although the computer says it's playable. Just on the face of it, something like this looks super dangerous. Bishop G4 mistake, but what I'm ultimately gunning for is getting my queen and my rook lined up on the H file and then trying to remove some of these defenders. And that could take a while, but psychologically, that's going to be highly unpleasant for black to play when they're just staring down the barrel of this H file doubling. So black takes with the F pawn. Bishop G4. Yeah, it doesn't like Bishop G4 so much. So here too, it wants me to take a bit of a slower tact. Knight F3. Let's just see. A6. Okay, E5. Knight F3 prepares E5, looking for a cramp. Yeah, that's a good point, because if ever I could get in E6, this would be phenomenal. Like split the board in half with this pawn. Really cramp black up. Yeah, I wasn't really sure, even though I have these pawns up here, I wasn't sure if I was going to go for E5 or F5 or any break, really. Trading the bishops seemed to make sense, though. But yeah, I could see how this move maybe isn't the best. Doesn't like E6 in reply. So it says black should take, which looks cooperative. But then this B5 move, yeah, so it really likes this counterplay based on B5. And then if takes, A6. More Benko Gambit style stuff. So ignoring the concrete nature of that operation, I think another big picture takeaway from this very short game, if you're getting attacked on a flank, it often makes sense to look for counterplay on the opposite flank. Okay, so the trend is not in black's favor on the king side. I've already made a lot of progress towards attacking their king. They probably want to play pretty minimalistically over there, try to keep things closed, keep the old hatches battened down. But they do have a free license to play on the queen side. But I admit b5 at this moment, and ever since black has played b6, really, that's a hard move to conceive of. I can see why that wasn't really on either of our radars, more than likely. Definitely wasn't on mine. But yeah, that'd be interesting. I don't know how I would have played against this. I might have played something like this. Takes and then castles queenside. Just give black a pawn, but try to coordinate, try to do something maybe with my F and E pawns to cramp black, probably centered around F5 if I were to guess. Hard to say. So black played E6. And here I went knight F3, another move the engine doesn't like. But I mentioned before, I think you got to be a little careful with the engine on chess.com. I could probably adjust the depth, get into my settings and do that. I have noticed, like, I don't fully agree with some of the evaluations it spits out sometimes. So this move seems to keep a pretty large advantage, and it looks natural to me, but maybe it's somewhat likes the knight on E2, I guess, trying to come to G3. Maybe it has more potential there for F5 or something. Yeah, and here's the fatal mistake, taking on D5. But even though black's close to 1900, I'm not super surprised by a move like this, because again, let's look at this from black's point of view. Flip the board. They're pretty much playing on the back couple ranks. All their pieces are on the 7th and 8th ranks. It's a visually unpleasant and oppressive position to play here. And when that happens, a lot of players, they panic, they make a rash decision, and they make the situation even worse. So don't panic in that scenario. It's hard, but you're going to lose the game faster if you do something rash. You got to think about playing guerrilla warfare style, breaking out in a smart way, maybe taking a calculated risk if necessary, especially if it could conceivably turn the tide of the game or force your opponent to a tough decision. But don't just play a knee-jerk move that, when you look one ply deeper, loses you material. Happens a lot, but don't be that person. No offense to my opponent. So, yeah, I mean, computer's giving bishop b7 or knight a6. I like this knight a6 move. Seems natural to keep the bishop trained on e6. Then come to c7. And yeah, I think this is very much a fight still. Says I should take. And how does this work? Bishop takes. Knight takes. Yeah, king f2. Coordinating. I don't know if I would have thought about king f2 so much, but maybe I try to park this here. Helps defend the f-pawn. Yeah, I've got space. And I've got ways I can attack. But this evaluation here and this general type of position is not that bad for a King's Indian at this point. So if you play the King's Indian, you're going to be used to positions where the engine claims an advantage for white. White has more space, but you have counterplay. You have the fianchetto bishop. You have piece play. Things can still get messy and happen. You see that even with one of the most notable King's Indian practitioners on YouTube, Daniel Naroditsky. He gets into a lot of messy King's Indian positions, probably ones where he would willingly admit that he's worse, but he knows he has counterplay. And that's what makes this opening dangerous. But don't play this opening, again, if you're not somewhat confident about the move orders and major ideas. So, like rook e8 and especially b6, that's not something that black should be doing here. And in general, by the way, with my own students, I don't recommend playing the King's Indian to anyone below about 1800, honestly. If you want to play it for fun, that's fine, but it's a tough opening to play because of the lack of space. I can tell I haven't recorded YouTube in a while because my voice is starting to get hoarse here, guys. But that's pretty much the major thing I wanted to say about this game. Some of these big picture takeaways. Yeah, and after queen takes d5, doesn't look like there's any way to complicate this. I was wondering briefly if there was some sort of queen trap scenario. But I'm not really seeing one. Like, let's say, wow, really hoarse here. knight e6, queen takes a8. Yeah, like this doesn't fly, even though it hits the queen and guards d5, because these points are loose. So there's probably no way to complicate this. Yeah, even f5 works in this case, doesn't it? Even if I don't want to take the rook. All right, so rather short game. Hopefully that was a little insight into the King's Indian. And as from the white side, I do like setting up the pawns on e4, d4, c4 in this opening. I think it's a smart thing to do. But there are systems where you can try not to do that. All right, let me know if you guys have any thoughts or questions on this. And like I said, I'll see you guys on YouTube again soon. Thanks, everyone.